Another new country to explore. Another set of challenges. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a question that I didn't yet realize would follow me long after I left. This was my last week in South America. I finally got to this room and I was celebrating, and immediately I got locked out on the terrace. I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You know, sometimes you just have to have a good laugh at yourself. This week did not go out according to plan at all. Okay, we're on the floor today. So I've been trying to make one video each week. That seems like a nice, clean way to separate things. When I went to Colombia, thought that the video would basically film itself. Like there would be a lot of fun things to do, great city, very social, lots of culture. But I gave up on that in the first couple of days. Well, I thought that it wouldn't be a video at all, so I kind of stopped filming. But things are a little bit different now that I have more perspective. Looking back, I think that this was the first time I noticed one of the questions that would surface over and over for me during the trip. And one of the questions that I'm still thinking about today. Now, I got off to a little bit of a rough start getting into Colombia. So I'd had a long travel day. I finally get to my dorm, it's late at night, and I get into the room. At this point, I'm really looking forward to going to bed. I'm really excited just to drop and fall asleep. And I get in and I see my bed. I'm like, okay, cool. I look for my locker and there's no locker. There's lockers there, don't get me wrong. They're just all taken. And okay, look. It's a pretty clear system, and it's the same at every single hostel I've been to. There's a bed, and the beds have numbers. There's a locker, and the lockers have numbers. So you would think each person, has one locker, and you take the locker that's associated with the number that's on your bed. Well, someone had decided that they should have 2 lockers instead of 1, which means that I had to sleep curled up with my massive backpack in my little tiny twin bed. Not ideal. On top of that, some girls barged into the room. They were banging on the door, screaming, and they were freaked out about cockroaches, which, like, great. Now I have to worry about cockroaches. But also, I totally understand the panic that you can feel when you see a cockroach in your room. I get that. I do. But maybe banging on people's doors in the middle of the night is not the best solution to that, necessarily. Anyway, that's my rant. That's over. It's fine. But I started realizing that I was feeling a bit off, and it wasn't because of the friction that I was encountering, because all of these things were little on their own. At this point, I had been traveling for about a month, and I think it was just getting to me. I missed having my own space. I was in this really social hostel, super cool city, and all I wanted to do was sleep on a real bed, wake up and not have to wait in line for the shower, and to have an actual desk to work at during the day where I wouldn't have to pack up all of my stuff every time I wanted to go and grab a coffee, right? And I decided to take this editing course, which I was really, really excited about because I knew how much time it would save me and how inefficient my process was beforehand. So I really just wanted to get into the grind, and the dorm was not fitting my needs for this week, unfortunately. Hostels are designed to collapse boundaries, right? And they're great at that. But suddenly I was desperately in need for some more boundaries. So I went and got myself a private room on night 3. At that point, I figured it was really well worth the extra money for me. I really just wanted to have a door that I could close and lock so that no one would come barging into the room at the middle of the night. I was super excited to finally check into my room. And it is gorgeous. I've got this big terrace right out there. So of course, immediately I go onto the terrace. There you go, flick that guy open, out onto the terrace, close the door behind me. And guess what happens? I locked myself out. I got locked out. I finally got to this room and I was celebrating, and immediately I got locked out on the terrace. I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And then, so I'm sitting there. I don't have my phone because I just dropped everything, got onto the balcony, closed the door behind me. That's it. So locked out, no phone, nothing. I'm like, okay, I can fix this. Apple Watch. So I can connect to my phone. It's still connected. I just got a call. So I try to find the number.
Search Messiah Medellín on Safari.
And it pulls up results, but it doesn't pull up the right one. So I do it a couple of times, and then Google highlights me as having strange activity. And it makes me do one of those tests where you have to click the pictures, which I can't do on my watch screen. Like, it wasn't letting me. So I'm like, okay, fine. Do I call down to people in the street? And then I finally, I hear this girl and she's out on the balcony. I hear a noise of a door opening. I'm like, thank you. Okay. So talk to her. She's like, okay, don't worry, I'll get help. And she goes and talks to the staff. She comes back probably 5 minutes later, and she's like, the staff will come back. I'm like, when are they coming back? Thank you. When are the staff coming back? And she said, yeah, probably in 10 minutes. Like, so that's the reaction. True. Okay. I'm like, okay, thank you. Oh God, it wasn't 10 minutes. They came within like 1 minute. The guy came with a crowbar or something. He opened the door and he let me in. He looked at me out on the balcony. He's like, "What, are you okay?" I'm like, "Help, please unlock it." So I showed him what happened and he just laughed. He's like, "Yeah, I don't know, that's weird." Yeah, it's weird. I don't know. Yeah, this was a bit of an unfortunate start. But once I was able to get back into my actual room, I did actually get everything that I wanted out of the private room. But the private room isn't really the point of the story. It just created the right conditions for me. For the first time on this trip, I finally had a moment that was quiet enough where I could stop paying attention to all of the external exciting things happening around me and actually take some time to look inward. A little bit of backstory. I canceled my Netflix subscription before I left for my trip. And look, I was just watching too much TV. It felt really, really nice after a long day of work to just be able to go home, shut my brain off, get wrapped up in a really good storyline. And I think that's just fine in moderation. But I wasn't exactly using it in moderation. I was staying up too late. I was cutting into the precious little sleep that I had. And it was all just to get a couple of seconds of entertainment more, to get one more episode in, right? I'm sure you've been there too. Or maybe you haven't, and kudos to you. But I certainly was. And I just wanted to break the habit. But every time I tried, I just couldn't make it stick because it was something that I took comfort in. So when I decided to go travel the world, I figured that would be the perfect time to cut the cord. So for those quiet moments during the trip, like long plane rides, I've tried to start reading more books instead, which is something that I used to love. And I spent huge swaths of my childhood curled up with a book. So I was excited to get back into this, and I set a goal for myself to do a lot more reading instead of just binge watching. So one of the first books that I picked up was A Gentleman in Moscow by Immortals. This novel follows Count Alexander Rostov. He's a Russian aristocrat, and he is sentenced to spend the rest of his life on house arrest in Moscow's Metropole Hotel, which he already lived in. He had this beautiful, luxurious suite, but they took that away from him, along with everything else that supported his identity. So his estate, his wealth, his freedoms, all of his expectations for the future, all of those were taken away or made irrelevant. And like I said, they took him from this big, luxurious suite that he was living at this like prime, it hotel in Moscow at the time, and they moved him into this tiny little room in the attic. So very different from the life that he had been living before. Now, the Count couldn't prevent his old life from disappearing, but he could decide how he would meet what remained. And I really sympathize with this idea. Now, I can't say, and I'm not trying to say that I fully understand or identify with him, because in his circumstances, things for him changed because of a violent political transformation, and his physical freedoms were completely taken away from him. Meanwhile, I decided to change my own circumstances of my own volition, and as a result, my freedom has been greater than ever. So, not exactly the same situation, but his situation did raise a more narrow question for me. And I think it hit me much harder because of where I was during this trip. If the structures that tell you who you are, like your career, where you live, where you went to school, your friends, your routines, if all of that suddenly disappears, who are you? Now, I think that books, like really good books, can act a bit like mirrors, right? Let me explain. So books look into a lot of human questions and identity, and, they explore a lot of really human themes. And I think that we, as readers, tend to focus on the things that we relate to the most at the time of reading. Really, I think that if you read the same book at different points of your life, you might notice different themes appearing. Or if someone else reads the book, they might notice something a little bit different. That's part of the reason why book clubs are so interesting, right? It's cool to have these discussions because we don't all look at things the exact same way. So reading this book and reading about the Count's stripped away identity, I started to wonder about my own identity. Which parts of a person's identity really belong to the environment that they're currently in, and which parts can actually be carried with you somewhere new? How fluid are our identities? Now, before the trip, I had a very easy way to answer all of these questions and explain who I was. I spent my years focused on school and then becoming a CPA and then building a career in finance. I was also used to being good at what I was doing. I was competent. I built systems and efficient routines, and I solved problems. Now, I was bumbling around in this editing program that I barely understood, and I was walking around the world trying to guess at whether or not some random street would make for a good photo. I had gone from knowing exactly what I was doing to wondering whether a hallway was cinematic. Now, there were other more visible parts of my identity that were missing too. I had the closet filled with all the things that I built up over time, and I loved styling outfits every day before going out. This is also pretty evident to see if you look just a little bit back further in my camera roll. Now I wear pretty much exclusively Lululemon, which, don't get me wrong, I love my Lululemon clothes. They're the most versatile pieces of clothing I have ever owned, but it doesn't really allow you the same expression of style having one backpack of clothing and it's all the same color, right? So all of my stuff now is packed away in a storage locker, but I do still think of this as a real part of me. It just wasn't the most present, and it wasn't like the current part of my daily life anymore. So I was really missing some of the things that would help me recognize myself. Now, my friends weren't physically around me either. And I already felt my loneliness earlier in the trip when my friend Allie, my best friend ever, Allie Butter, left after Patagonia. But there was another layer to their absence that I hadn't really fully processed yet. And I think it's this idea that the people you've known for years really help to stabilize your identity, especially old friends. They remember the old versions of you. They understand the history behind all the things that you're saying and talking about. And they have this familiar version of you in their minds that they reflect back at you. When I got to Colombia, and anywhere on this trip, frankly, nobody knew any of that, right? I was starting off fresh with every single person. So when I introduced myself, I would usually talk about travel first. And I told people that I had left my career for a year just to travel. I talked about what I had done for work only if the person specifically asked. And I did this because it was the most current form and function of my life, but also because it was the most easy point of connection with other travelers. I was also aware, though, of how different my introduction would have been back in Toronto, which absolutely, without question, would have referenced what I did for work within the first sentence. That doesn't mean that one introduction is better or more true than the other, right? Both are true, but the parts that I placed at the front just shifted depending on the situation. I'll say there is a sense of freedom in being able to decide which parts of yourself that others see, which parts you make more prominent. I had thought before about identity as something that you build up over time and then you just possess, no matter what, full stop. But when I started traveling, I started to see how much of it was being continuously shaped by context. So this made me think that there are two types of identity, or two kinds of identity. Some parts are more like scaffolding, so that would be your job title, address, possessions, clothes, all this stuff, and then the role that other people expect you to play. I think other parts are closer to practices and values. So for me, I mean, I was still curious. I was still adventurous. I loved learning. I loved trying things that I hadn't done before. And I still noticed when someone feels uneasy, partly because I had felt that way so often during my own youth, right? So I always try to make people feel welcome and comfortable and just try to make people feel like they can be themselves and open up without being judged. Those things don't depend on a condo or a wardrobe or a career, right? But they weren't permanent possessions either. It's something that only remained part of me if I actively chose to keep practicing these values. And this is funny because I had always thought of identity as something that you built and then you owned. I was beginning to wonder whether it was something that you actively had to keep choosing more than something that you built out. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend I found myself in Colombia or anything. Nothing was resolved that week. I just started asking the questions. I also hadn't thought of this week as a major turning point at the time. I thought of it more like a practical footnote. I mean, I had just finished off my editing course and I thought of that as my biggest accomplishment of the week, which it was pretty great. But after Colombia, I did start slowing down my trip. And I began to realize that this year couldn't be just about producing things, which is sort of my default. And it couldn't just be about proving that leaving my position wasn't this massive mistake. Even though that's very tempting to do. Now, having so few distractions is very rare, right? Everyone deals with it. Everyone has a ton of stuff going on. I started thinking that it might be more important to use this very rare time in my life when I don't have that many distractions to start understanding myself more and, focus on that rather than trying to turn all of this into some kind of output. Now, my week in Colombia didn't resolve all of that. It really just introduced the question. Looking back, this week feels a lot more significant now because the same questions kept returning. What actually matters to me? What am I trying to optimize for? And what kind of life am I really trying to build here? So essentially, who am I and who do I want to be?
Suddenly, the world I used to know, I see it differently. You woke me from a dream, now here's reality. Baby, you are really hurting me.